Alrighty. Welcome back to Free Read. Haha, ready. Free Read Fridays. I'm your intrepid narrator, Fraggeth, and today we're reading a couple selections picked not entirely at random, as close to random as our algorithmic bodies can stand, picked selections that I have from my growing personal archive of stuff that I've cribbed from Project Gutenberg. So we got a couple short stories. We've got Belly Laugh, The Anglers of Ars, The Heir of Castor Oil, and The Big Fix. Um, Presumably still in that order. So the first one is a little racy and dated. Uh, my apologies if it offends anyone's sensibilities. Uh, Please know that the views of the person reading this does not necessarily sync up or mesh with the views of the characters contained within the fictional, I repeat, fictional story. Whether they embody the views of the author who wrote them is another matter entirely, and also shouldn't matter because it's a work of, I'll repeat this again because it seems to bear repeating, fiction. It is not real. It is not fake. It is a work of fiction. I don't know. The morality of judging the behavior of characters in a work of fiction as written by somebody is, I suppose, an interesting conversation that maybe someone should have. I don't know that I want to have it. What I'm doing for this week's is I'm going to try to show you what I'm reading from, so you can see the text if you zoom in real close and squint real close. I'm not going to make the text massive. Like, I doubt anyone can read all of that. I sincerely doubt it. It's tiny. Like, I'm looking at it right now, and in fact, I'm going to bop open my Twitch feed here, or YouTube. Oh, Twitch when it's convenient will do that. And I'm going to make that full screen and see if I can read it there. Come on. Click on the thing. Thank you. Good boy. Yes, yes you are. Okay, I can actually read that. That's not too bad. It's delayed by 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, 4 Mississippi, 5 Mississippi, 6. About 5 and change seconds. Which is about right. Not to worry, however. At any rate, let's get cracking. I'd make a sea monster noise here to make a Kraken joke, but A, it'd be loud, and B, who has the energy to be a big tentacled oceanic boy? Oh, yeah, he's a big squelchy boy. Alright, so this is Belly Laugh. This is kind of a character story, so I'm going to try and get into it. The rest of these are going to be a little harder to do that for. So this is... When did this come from? This came from Amazing Stories, April, May of 1953. I think all of these are like 50s and 60s. I don't know when Anglers of Ars was. 53. When was the big fix? 59. So yeah, basically 53 to 61. I think one of them is from 61. All right. Whoops. Don't want to do that. Alrighty. So with that, I'll get crackery. Belly Laugh by Ivar Jorgensen. You hear a lot of talk these days about secret weapons. If it's not a new wrinkle in nuclear fission, it's a gun to shoot around corners and down winding staircases. Or maybe a nice new strain of bacteria guaranteed to give you radioactive dandruff. Our own suggestion is to pipe a few of our television commercials into Russia and bore the enemy to death. Well, it seems that Ivar Jorgensen has hit on the ultimate engine of destruction, a weapon designed to exploit man's greatest weakness. The blueprint can be found in the next few pages, and as the soldier in the story says, our only hope is to keep a sense of humor. Me? I'm looking for my outfit. Got cut off in that Haljan tunnel attack. Mind if I sit down with you guys a while? Thanks. Coffee? Damn, this is heaven. Ain't seen a cup of coffee in a year. What? You said it. This sure is a hell of a war. Tough on a guy's feet. Yeah, that's right. Holland Tunnel Skirmish, where the Ruskies used that new gun. Uh-huh. God, it was awful. Guys popping off all around the guy and him not knowing why. No sense to it. No noise. No wound. Just popping off. That's the trouble with this war. It won't settle down to a routine. Always something new. What the hell chance has a guy got to figure things out? And I tell you, them Ruskies are coming up with new weapons just as fast as we are. Enough to make your hair stand on end. Sugar? Christ, yes. Ain't seen sugar for a year. You see, it's like this. We were bottled up in the pits around the tunnel for 7 damn days. It was like nothing you ever saw before. Oops, sorry. Didn't mean to splash you. I was laughing about something that happened there. To a guy. Maybe you guys would get a kick out of it. After all, we gotta keep our sense of humor. You see, there was me and a Kentucky kid named Stillwell in this pit. A pretty big pit with lots of room. And we were all alone. This Stillwell was a nice kid. Green and lonesome, and it's pretty sad, really, but there's a yak in it, and as I say, we gotta keep a sense of humor. Well, this Stillwell, a really green kid, is unhappy and just plain drooling for his gal back home. He talks about his mother, of course, and his old man, but it's the girl that's really on his mind, as you guys can plainly understand. He's seeing her every place, like spots in front of his eyes. Nice spots doing things to him when this Rusky babe shows up. Let's reread that. Nice spots doing things to him when this Rusky babe shows up. My gun came up without any orders from me, just as she poked her puss over the edge of the pit, and... Huh? Oh, thank you kindly. Sure tastes good, but I don't want to short you guys. Thank you kindly. Well, as I was saying, this Rusky babe pokes her nose over the edge of the pit, and Stillwell dives and knocks down my gun. He says, "You son of a bitch!" Just like that. Wild and desperate, like you'd say to a guy if the guy was just kicking over the last jug of water on a desert island. It would have been long enough to for her to kill. Whoops! It would have been long enough. I'm getting tongue tied on this coffee and sugar and whatever. It would have been long enough for her to kill us if I hadn't had good reflexes. Even then, all I had time to do was knock the pistol out of her hand and drag her into the pit. With her play bollocks, she was confused and bewildered. She ain't a fighter. She sits back against the wall staring at us deadpan with big, expressionless eyes. She's a plenty pretty babe, and I could see exactly what had happened as far as Stillwell was concerned. His spots had come to life in very adequate form, so to speak. Stillwell goes over and sits down beside her, and I'm very much on the alert because I know where his courage comes from. But I decide it's all right because I see the babe is not belligerent, just confused, kind of, and friendly, and willing. Kind of a whipped little dog willing, and man, oh man, she was sure what Stillwell needed. They kind of went together like a hand and a glove, natural-like, and it followed, pretty natural, that when Stillwell got up and led her around a wing of the pit, out of sight, she went willing, like that same little dog. Uh-huh. No, you guys. Two's enough. I wouldn't rob you. Well, okay. Thanks kindly. Well, there I was, all alone, But happy for Stillwell, 'cause I know it's what the kid needs, and in spots like that, what difference does it make? Yank, Rusky, Mongolian, as long as she's willing. Then, you guys, Stillwell comes back out, wall-eyed, real wall-eyed, like being hit but not knocked out and still walking. I know what it is. Some kind of shock. I get up and walk over and take a look at the babe where he'd left her. And I bust out laughing. I told you guys there was a yak in this. I laughed like a fool. It was that funny. As much as I had time to before Stillwell cracked. It was enough to crack him. The little thing that pushes a guy over the edge. He lets out a yell and screams, "For Christ's sake! For Christ's sake! Nothing but a bucket of bolts! Nothing but a couple of plastic lumps!" That was when I hit him. I had to. He was for the birds, Stillwell was. An hour later, we got relieved, and a couple of medicos carried him away, strapped to a stretcher, gone like a kite. And they took the robot, too, and its clothes, but they forgot the brassiere. So I took it, and I've been carrying it ever since. But I'll leave it with you guys if you want, for the coffee. Might make you think about home. After all, like the man says, we gotta keep our sense of humor. Well, so long, you guys, and thanks. And that was Belly Laugh by Ivar Jorgensen. Short, sweet, to the point. Soviet robot, babe, assassin things. I guess. It's cute. It's racy. Not racist, racy. There's a difference, I swear. Let me swap my window here to something different. Come on, let's go to properties. Oh, yes, that's the one. No, that's not the one. That's not the one. The other one, please. Thank you. That's the one. Excellent. Now, of course, I need to, excuse me. Oh, fit to screen. Plop. These are all in slightly different sizes each window, so I'm going to have to do that every time. But that's okay. All right, give me a sec to recover my throat from all that abuse. So next up, we've got The Anglers of Ars by Roger D. Illustrated by Bob Martin. This e-text was produced from If, Worlds of Science Fiction, January 1953. Oh, good. There were two pinkish bipedal fishermen on the tiny islet. In order to make Isaac Walton's sport complete, there must be an angler, a fish, and some bait. All three existed on ours, but there was a question as to which was which. The third night of the Marco IV's landfall on the moonless Altarian planet was a repetition of the two before it, a 9-hour intermission of drowsy, pastoral peace. Navigator Arthur Farrell, it was his turn to stand watch, was sitting at an open-side port with a magno-scanner ready. But in spite of his vigilance, he had not exposed a film when the inevitable pre-dawn rainbow began to shimmer over the eastern ocean. Sunrise brought him alert with a jerk, frowning at sight of two pinkish bipedal Arsian fishermen posted on the tiny coral islet a quarter-mile offshore, their blank triangular faces turned stolidly toward the beach. "They're at it again," Farrell called, and dropped to the mossy turf outside. Roll out on the double. I'm going to magnafilm this." Stryker and Gibson came out of their sleeping cubicles reluctantly, belting on the loose shorts which all three wore in the balmy Arsian climate. Stryker blinked and yawned as he let himself through the port, his fringe of white hair tousled and his naked paunch sweating. He looked, Farrell thought for the thousandth time, more like a retired cook than like the veteran commander of a Terran colony's expedition. Gibson followed, stretching his powerfully muscled body like a wrestler to throw off the effects of sleep. Gibson was linguist ethnologist of the crew, a blocky man in his early 30s with thick black hair and heavy brows that shaded a square, humorless face. "Any sign of the squids yet?" he asked. They won't show up until the dragons come," Farrell said. He adjusted the light filter of the magnoscanner and scowled at Stryker. "Lee, I wish you'd let me break up the show this time with a disbeam. This butchery gets on my nerves." Stryker shielded his eyes with his hands against the glare of the sun on water. "You know I can't do that, Arthur. These Arsians may turn out to be fifth-order beings or higher, and under Terran regulations our tampering with what may be a basic culture pattern would amount to armed invasion. We'll have to crack that cackle and grunt language of theirs and learn something of their mores before we can interfere." Farrell turned an irritable stare on the incurious group of Arsians gathering, nets and fishing spears in hand, at the edge of the sheltering bramble forest. "What stumps me is their motivation," he said. "Why do the fools go out to that islet every night when they must know damned well what will happen the next morning?" Gibson answered him with an older problem, his square face puzzled. "For that matter, what became of the city I saw when we came in through the stratosphere? It must be a tremendous thing, yet we've searched the entire globe in the scouter and found nothing but water and a scattering of little islands like this one, all covered with bramble. It wasn't a city these pink fishers could have built, either. Their architecture was beyond them by 1,000,000 years." Stryker and Farrell traded baffled looks. The city had become something of a fixation with Gibson, and his dogged insistence, coupled with an irritating habit of being right, had worn their patience thin. "There never was a city here, Gib," Stryker said. "You dozed off while we were making planetfall, that's all." Gibson stiffened resentfully, but Farrell's voice cut his protest short. "Get set, here they come." Out of the morning rainbow dropped a swarm of winged lizards, 20 feet in length and a glistening chlorophyll green in the early light. They stooped like hawks upon the islet offshore, burying the two Arsian fishers instantly under their snapping, threshing bodies. Then around the outcrop the sea boiled whitely, churned to foam by a sudden uprushing of black, octopoid shapes. "The squids," Stryker grunted. "Right on schedule. 2 seconds too late, as usual, to stop the slaughter." A barrage of barbed tentacles lashed out of the foam and drove into the melee of winged lizards. Melee? There is a difference between melee and melee, and I can't remember what it is right now. The lizards took the air at once, leaving behind 3 of their number who disappeared under the surface like harpooned seals. No trace remained of the 2 Arsian natives. "A neat example of dog-eat-dog," Farrell said, snapping off the magnoscanner. "Do any of those beauties look like city builders, Gib?" Chattering pink natives straggled past from the shelter of the thorn forest, ignoring the Earthmen, and lined the casting ledges along the beach to begin their day's fishing. "Nothing we've seen yet could have built that city," Gibson said stubbornly, "but it's here somewhere, and I'm going to find it. Will either of you be using the scouter today?" Stryker threw up his hands. "I've a mountain of data to collate, and Arthur is off duty after standing watch last night. Help yourself, but you won't find anything." The scouter was a speeding dot on the horizon when Farrell crawled into his sleeping cubicle a short time later, leaving Stryker to mutter over his litter of notes. Sleep did not come to him at once. A vague sense of something overlooked prodded irritatingly at the back of his consciousness, but it was not until drowsiness had finally overtaken him that the discrepancy assumed definite form. He recalled then that on the first day of the Marco's planetfall, one of the pink fishers had fallen from a casting ledge into the water, and had all but drowned before his fellows pulled him out with extended spear shafts. Which meant that the fishers could not swim, else some would surely have gone in after him. And the Marco's crew had explored ours exhaustively, without finding any slightest trace of boats or boat landings. The train of association completed itself with automatic logic, almost rousing Farrell out of his doze. "I'll be damned," he muttered. "No boats, and they don't swim. Then how the devil do they get out to that islet?" He fell asleep with the paradox unresolved. Stryker was still humped over his records when Farrell came out of his cubicle and broke a packaged meal from the food locker. The Visicom over the control board hummed softly, its screen blank on open channel. "Gibson found his lost city yet?" Farrell asked, and grinned when Stryker snorted. He's scouring the daylight side now," Stryker said. "Arthur, I'm going to ground Gib tomorrow, much as I dislike giving him a direct order. He's got that phantom city on the brain, and he lacks the imagination to understand how dangerous to our assignment an obsession of that sort can be." Farrell shrugged. "I'd agree with you offhand if it weren't for Gib's bull-headed habit of being right. I hope he finds it soon, if it's here. I'll probably be standing his watch until he's satisfied." Stryker looked relieved. "Would you mind taking it tonight? I'm completely bushed after today's logging." Farrell waved a hand and took up his magnoscanner. It was dark outside already, the close, soft night of a moonless tropical world whose moist atmosphere absorbed even starlight. He dragged a chair to the open port and packed his pipe, settling himself comfortably while Stryker mixed a nightcap before turning in. Later, he remembered that Stryker dissolved a tablet in his glass, but at the moment it meant nothing. In a matter of minutes, the older man's snoring drifted to him, a sound faintly irritating against the velvety hush outside. Farrell lit his pipe and turned to the inconsistencies he had uncovered. The Arzians did not swim, and without boats. It occurred to him, then, that there had been two of the pink fishers on the islet each morning, and the coincidence made him sit up suddenly, startled. Why two? Why not three, or four, or only one? He stepped out through the open lock and paced restlessly up and down on the springy turf, feeling the ocean breeze soft on his face. 3 days of dull routine log work had built up a need for physical action that chafed his temper. He was intrigued and at the same time annoyed by the enigmatic relation that linked the Arzian fishers to the dragons and squids, and his desire to understand that relation was aggravated by the knowledge that ours could be a perfect world for Terran colonization. That is, that is, he thought wryly, if Terran colonists could stomach the weird custom pursued by its natives of committing suicide in pairs. He went over again the improbable drama of the past 3 mornings, and found it not too unnatural until he came to the motivation and the means of transportation that placed the Arzians in pairs on the islet, when his whole fabric of speculation fell into a tangled snarl of inconsistencies. He gave it up finally. How could any Earthman rationalize the outlandish compulsions that actuated so alien a race? He went inside again, and the sound of Stryker's muffled snoring fanned his restlessness. He made his decision abruptly, laying aside the magnoscanner for a hand flash and a pocket-sized Audicom unit which he clipped to the belt of his shorts. He did not choose a weapon because he saw no need for one. The torch would show him how how the natives reached the outcrop, and if he should need help, the Autocom would summon Stryker. Investigating without Stryker's sanction was, strictly speaking, a breach of Terran regulations, but damn Terran regulations, he muttered. I've got to know. Farrell snapped on the torch at the edge of the thorn forest and entered briskly, eager for action now that he had begun. Just inside the edge of the bramble, he came upon a pair of Arzians curled up together on the mossy ground, sleeping soundly, their triangular faces wholly blank and unrevealing. He worked deeper into the underbrush and found other sleeping couples, but nothing else. There were no humming insects, no twittering nightbirds or scurrying rodents. He had worked his way close to the center of the island without further discovery, and was on the point of turning back, disgusted, when something bulky and powerful seized him from behind. A sharp sting burned his shoulder, wasp-like, and a sudden overwhelming lassitude swept him into a darkness deeper than the Arzian night. His last conscious thought was not of his own danger, but of Stryker, asleep and unprotected behind the Marco's open port. He was standing erect when he woke, his back to the open sea and a prismatic glimmer of early dawn rainbow shining on the water before him. For a moment he was totally disoriented. Then, from the corner of an eye, he caught the pinkish... Oh my goodness. Sorry. Then, from the corner of an eye, he caught the pinkish blur of an Arzian fisher standing beside him, and cried out hoarsely in sudden panic when he tried to turn his head, and could not. He was on the coral outcropping offshore, and except for the involuntary muscles of balance and respiration, his body was paralyzed. The first red glow of sunrise blurred the reflected rainbow at his feet, but for some seconds his shuttling mind was too busy to consider the danger. Oh, was too busy to consider the danger of his predicament. Whatever brought me here anesthetized me first, he thought. That sting in my shoulder was like a hypo needle. Panic seized him again when he remembered the green flying lizards. More seconds passed before he gained control of himself, sweating with the effort. He had to get help. If he could switch on the Autocom at his belt and call Stryker. He bent every ounce of his will towards raising his right hand, and failed. His arm was like a limb of lead, its inertia too great to budge. He relaxed the effort with a groan, sweating again when he saw a fiery half-disk of sun on the water, edges blurred and distorted by tiny surface ripples. On shore he could see the Marco IV resting between thorn forest and beach, its silvered sides glistening with dew. The port was still open, and the empty carrier rack in the bow told him that Gibson had not yet returned with the scouter. He grew aware then that sensation was returning to him slowly, that the cold surface of the Autocom unit at his hip, unfelt before, was pressing against the inner curve of his elbow. He bent his will again toward motion. This time the arm tensed a little, enough to send hope flaring through him. If he could put pressure enough against the stud... The tiny click of its engaging sent him faint with relief. "Stryker!" he yelled. "Lee, roll out! Stryker!" The Autocom hummed gently, without answer. He gathered himself for another shout, and recalled with a chill of horror the tablet Stryker had mixed into his nightcap the night before. Worn out by his work, Stryker had made certain that he would not be easily disturbed. The flattened sun disk on the water brightened and grew rounder. Above its reflected glare he caught a flicker of movement, a restless suggestion of flapping wings. He tried again. "Stryker, help me! I'm on the islet!" The Audicom crackled. The voice that answered was not Stryker's, but Gibson's. "Farrell, what the devil are you doing on that butcher's block?" Farrell fought down an insane desire to laugh. "Never mind that! Get here fast, Gib! The flying lizards!" He broke off, seeing for the first time the octopods that ringed the outcrop just under the surface of the water, waiting with barbed tentacles spread and yellow eyes studying him glassily. He heard the unmistakable flapping of wings behind and above him then, and thought with shock-born lucidity, "I wanted a backstage look at this show, and now I'm one of the cast." The scouter roared in from the west across the thorn forest, flashing so close above his head that he felt the wind of its passage. Almost instantly he heard the shrilling blast of its emergency. Oh my god. Ugh. Sorry. I don't know if I'm just not getting enough oxygen or what. Almost instantly he heard the shrilling blast of its emergency bow jets as Gibson met the lizard swarm head on. Gibson's voice came tinnily from the Audicom. "Scattered them for a moment, Arthur. Blinded the whole crew with the exhaust, I think. Stand fast now. I'm going to pick you up." The scouter settled on the outcrop beside Farrell, so close that the hot wash of its exhaust gases scorched his bare legs. Gibson put out thick brown arms and hauled him inside like a straw man, ignoring the natives. The scouter darted for shore, with Farrell lying across Gibson's knees in the cockpit, his head hanging half overside. Farrell had a last dizzy glimpse of the islet against the rush of green water below, and felt his shaky laugh of relief stick in his throat. Two of the octopods were swimming strongly for shore, holding the rigid Arzian native carefully above water between them. "Gib," Farrell croaked. "Gib, can you risk a look back? I think I've gone mad." The scouter swerved briefly as Gibson looked back. "You're all right, Arthur. Just hang on tight. I'll explain everything when we get you safe in the Marco." Farrell forced himself to relax, more relieved than alarmed by the painful pricking of returning sensation. "I might have known it, damn you," he said. "You found your lost city, didn't you?" Gibson sounded a little disgusted, as if he were still angry with himself over some private stupidity. "I'd have found it sooner if I'd had any brains. It was under water, of course." In the Marco 4, Gibson routed Stryker out of his cubicle and mixed drinks around, leaving Farrell comfortably relaxed in the padded control chair. The paralysis was still wearing off slowly, easing Farrell's fear of being permanently disabled. "We never saw the city from the scouter because we didn't go high enough," Gibson said. "I realized that finally, remembering how they used the high-altitude blimps during the first wars to spot submarines. And when I took the scouter up far enough, there it was, at the ocean bottom, a city to compare with anything men ever built." Stryker stared. "A marine city? What use would sea creatures have for buildings?" "None," Gibson said. "I think the city must have been built ages ago, by men or by a man-like race, judging from the architecture, and was submerged later by a sinking of land masses that killed off the original builders and left ours nothing but an oversized archipelago. The squids took over then, and from all appearances they've developed a culture of their own." "I don't see it," Stryker complained, shaking his head. "The pink fishers—" "Are cattle, more or less," Gibson finished. "The octopods are the dominant race, and they're so far above fifth order that we're completely out of bounds here. Under Terran regulations, we can't colonize ours. It would be armed invasion." "Invasion of a squid world?" Farrell protested, baffled. "Why should surface colonization conflict with an undersea culture, Gib? Why couldn't we share the planet?"
Because the octopods own the islands, too, and keep them policed, Gibson said patiently. They even own the pink fishers. It was one of the squid people, making a dry land canvas of his preserve here to pick a couple of victims for this morning's show, that carried you off last night. Behold a familiar pattern shaping up, Stryker said. He laughed suddenly, a great irrepressible bellow of sound. Ours is a squid's world, Arthur, don't you see? And like most civilized peoples, they're sportsmen. The flying lizards are the game they hunt, and they raise the pink fishers for... Farrell swore in astonishment. Then those poor devils are put out there deliberately, like worms on a hook, angling in reverse. No wonder I couldn't spot their motivation. Gibson got up and sealed the port, shutting out the soft morning breeze. Colonization being out of the question, we may as well move on before the octopods get curious enough about us to make trouble. Do you feel up to the acceleration, Arthur? Farrell and Stryker looked at each other, grinning. Farrell said, You don't think I want to stick here and be used for bait again, do you? He and Stryker were still grinning over it when Gibson, unamused, blasted the Marco 4 free of ours. One sec, somebody's got a fire, I guess. Whatever, that's the end of the story. And that was The Anglers of Ours by Roger D. Worlds of science fiction. If. Check and checkmate. It is a robot sowing his crop of naked people. Whole lot of naked people he's sowing. He just sows that crop. Alrighty. Let me swap window. Properties. We're doing this on the fly, boys. We're doing it. That's the wrong one. Wait, where is it? Don't hide from me. Do not hide. Thank you. And properties, transform, fit, plop. The air of castor oil. Click. I may need to make that bigger. Okay, this e-text was produced from Galaxy Magazine, August of 1961. Extensive research did not uncover any evidence that the U.S. copyright on this publication was renewed. It's by Jim Harmon. Okay, let me get a little more water in me here. Overall, it'll be a shorter stream than the last couple, which have been like 2 hour plus affairs. That's fine. It's fine. Can't always be long and dry. The Air of Castor Oil by Jim Harmon. Let the dead past bury its dead? Not while I am alive, it won't. It was surely all right for me to let myself do it now. I couldn't have been more safe. In the window of the radio store, a colored television set was enjoying a quiz by itself, and creased in my pocket was the newspaper account of the failure of a monumental human adventure in the blooming extinction of a huge rocket. The boys on the corner seemed hardly human, scowling anthropoids in walrus-skin coats. It was my own time. Anybody could see I was safe, and I could risk doing what I ached to do. I turned the corner. The brakes were against me from the start. It didn't come as any surprise. I could never get away with it. I knew that all along. There was a Packard parked just beyond the fire plug. The metal and glass fronts of the buildings didn't show back here, only seasoned brick glued with powdering chalk. The line of the block seemed to stretch back, ever further away from the glossy fronts into the crumbling stone. A man brushed past me, wearing an Ivy League suit and a snap-brim hat, carrying a briefcase. And, reassuringly, he was in a hurry. I decided to chance it. I certainly wanted to do it in the worst way. My footsteps carried me down the block. A little car spurted on past me. One of those foreign jobs, I decided. Only it wasn't. I fixed the silhouette in my mind's eye and identified it. A Henry J. Still, I wasn't worried. It was actually too early in the day. It wasn't as if it were evening or anything like that. The little store was right where I left it, rotting quietly to itself. The back number store, with the faded circus poster proclaimed in red and gold, or now pink and lemon. In the window, in cellophane envelopes, were the first issue of Life, a recent issue of Modern Man with a modern woman fronting it, a big, big book of Buck Rogers and the Silver Cities of Venus, and a brand new, sun-bleached copy of Dr. Zhivago. There was a little car at the curb. This time I recognized that it wasn't an import, just a Crosley. I went in, the brass handle making me conscious of the sweat on my palm. The old man sat behind a fortress of magazines and books, treacherously reading the funnies in a newspaper. His bald head swiveled on the hunched shoulders of his sweater, which was azuring toward white. He grinned, toothless. "Come back for more of the stuff, did you?" He laid down the newspaper. That sub-headline couldn't really be making so nasty a suggestion to a noted general, could it? "Yes," I laughed, not very true. "I know what a craving can be. I shouldn't smoke, but I do. I've tried to stop, but I lie there thinking about cigarettes half the night. Long ones, short ones, smoked ones unlit. I feel like I could smoke one in each hand. It like that with you?" Not that bad. To me, it's just. "Don't tell me reading isn't a craving with some of you fellows. I've seen guys come in here, hardly two threads stuck together on them, and grab up them horror magazines and read until sweat starts rolling off the end of their nose. I've hardly got the heart to throw 'em out." Horror magazines. Ones with lovely girls about to have their flesh shredded by toothy vampires. Yes, they were a part of it. Not a big part, but a part. "That's not what I want to see. I want—" The old man snickered. "I know what you want. Indeed I do. This way." I followed his spidering hand, and sure enough, there they were. Stacks upon stacks of air war pulp magazines. 15 cents for ones in good condition." The old man pronounced the ritual. "A dime for ones with incomplete covers, 3 for a quarter. Check 'em at the desk when you go." I ran my hand down a stack. Wings, Daredevil Aces, G8 and his Battle Aces, the Lone Eagle, all of them. The old man was watching me. He skittered back across the floor and snatched up a magazine. It was a copy of Sky Fighters, with a girl in a painted-on flying suit hanging from the struts of a tiger moth. This one," he said. "This must be a good one. I bet she gets shoved right into that propeller there. Bet she gets chopped to pieces. Pieces." "I'll take it." Reluctantly, he handed over the magazine, waited a moment, then left me. I stared at the stacks of flying story magazines, and I felt the slow run of the drop of sweat down my nose. My sickness was terrible. It is as bad to be nostalgic for things you have never known as for an orphan who has never had a home to be homesick. Living in the past, that was always me. I never watched anything on TV made later than 1935. I was in love with Garbo, Ginger Rogers, Dolores Del Rio. My favorite stars were Richard Dix, Chester Morris, and Richard Arlen. The music I listened to was Gershwin and Arlen and Chicago jazz. And my reading was the pulp literature harking back to the First World War. This was the biggest part of it all, I think. You identify with the hero of any story if it's well enough written, but the identification I felt with the pilots in air war stories was plainly ridiculous. I was there. I was in the saddle of the cockpit, feeling on my face the bite of the slipstream. No, that was a later term. The prop wash? No, that was still later. The backlash from the screw, that was it. I was lifting to meet the Fokker triplanes in the dawn sky. Then, in a moment, my Vickers was chattering in answer to the Spandaus, firing through the crew, outfitted with iron edges to deflect bullets that did not pass to the left and right, and back through the aerial maps in the cockpit pocket at my knee. Here he comes, the Spandaus firing right through the screw in perfect synchronization. Look at that chivalrous wave. You can almost see the dueling scar on his cheek from old Krautenberg. He can afford to be chivalrous in that Fokker. I'd like to trade this skidoo for it. That may be just what I do, too, if I don't watch it. You ain't any bulky, mister, but this is from the 5th for Squadron 70. Missed! Hard on that rudder. God, look at the snake in that fabric. At least it was a lie about them using incendiaries. One of your own tricks for you, Heine. Up on the stick, up under your tail, into the blind spot. Where am I? Where am I? Right here. Look at that tail go. Tony can't be giving you as good stuff as he claims. So long. I'm waving. See? He's pulling her up. No tail, and he's pulling her up. He's a good man. Come on. A little more. A little more, and you can dead stick her. Come on, buddy. You're doing it. You're pulling her up. But not enough. God, what a mess. I'm sick. That damned castor oil in the carburetor. I'll be in the WC until 0600. No, the air wasn't one of castor oil, but the pleasant smell of aged paper and printer's ink. I'd been daydreaming again. I shouldn't forget things were different lately. It was becoming dangerous. I gathered up an armload of air war magazines at random. Leaning across the table, I noticed the curtain in back for the first time. It was a beaded curtain of many different colors. Theda Bara might have worn it for a skirt. Behind the curtain was a television set. It was a comforting anti-anachronism here. The 6 or 8-inch picture was on a very flat tube, a more pronounced predicta. The size and the flatness didn't seem to go together. Then I saw that the top part of the set was a mirror reflecting an image from the roof of the cabinet, where the actual picture tube lay flat. There was an old movie on the channel. An old, old movie. Lon Chaney, Sr., in a western as a bad man. He was protecting a doll-faced blonde from the rest of the gang, standing them off from a grove of rocks. The flickering action caught my unblinking eyes. Tom Sanshee is sneaking across the top of the rocks, a knife in his dirty half-breed hand. Raymond Hatton makes a try for his old boss, but Chaney stops his clock for him. Now William Farnham is riding up with the posse. Tom makes a try with the knife. The girl screams, and Chaney turns the blade back on him. It goes through his neck, all the way through. The blonde is running toward Farnham as he polishes off the rest of the gang and dismounts, her blouse shredded, revealing one breast. Is that the dawn of Bessie Love? Chaney stands up in the rocks. Farnham aims his 6-shooter. No, no, say the girl's lips. No, no, says the subtitle. Farnham fires. Swimming in blood, Chaney smiles sadly and falls. I had seen movies like that before. When I was a kid, I had seen flicker flashbacks between chapters of Flash Gordon and Johnny Mac Brown westerns. I looked at old movies and heard the oily voice making fun of them. But hadn't I also seen these pictures with the sound of piano playing and low conversation? I had seen these pictures before the war. The war had made a lot of difference in my life. Comic books were cut down to half their size, from 64 to 32 pages, and prices had gone up to where you had to pay $17 for a pair of shoes, so high that people said Wilson should do something about it. Tom Mix had gone off the air, and he and his cowboy commandos beat the Japs in comic books. Only, hadn't he sold Liberty Bonds with Helen Morgan? And at school I had bought defense, war, savings, security, liberty, freedom. I had bought stamps at school. I never did get enough to trade in for a bond, but Mama had taken my book and traded parts of it in for coffee. She could never get enough coffee. Nobody would look at my magazines, the old man chuckled, if I put it out front. My boy got me that. He runs a radio and Victrola store. A good boy. His name's in the fishbowl. I pressed some money on him and walked myself out of the store. Shutting the door, I saw that the copy of Dr. Zhivago had been replaced with Gone with the Wind. Replaced by Gone with the Wind. Frankly, Scarlet, I don't give a damn. The street was full of wooden-paneled station wagons, blunt little roadsters with canvas tops, swept back, tailless sedans. Only one dark-tailed, over-thyroided car moved through the traffic. It had a light on the roof. I dodged in front of a horse-drawn garbage wagon and behind an electric postal truck, and I ran for that light, leaving a trail of gaudy air battles checkering the street behind me. I grabbed the handle on the door, opened it, and threw myself into the back seat. Madison Avenue, I said from my diaphragm, without any breath behind it. Something was wrong. Two men were in the front seat. The driver showed me his hard, expressionless face. What do you think you're doing? This isn't a taxicab? I asked blankly. Park police. I sat there while we drove on for a few minutes. D&D, the second man said to the driver. Right into our laps. The second officer leaned forward and clicked something. I'll get the city boys. Nah, kill it, Carl. Think of all that damn paperwork. Carl shrugged. What will we do with him? I was beginning to attach myself to my surroundings. The street was full of traffic. My kind of traffic. Cars that were too big or too small. Look, officers, I'm not drunk or disorderly. I thought this was a cab. I just wanted to get away from back there. The two policemen exchanged glances. What are you running from? The driver asked. How could I tell him that? Before I even got a chance to try, he said, What did you do? I didn't do anything. The car was turning into shadows, stopping. We were in an alley. Soggy newspapers, dead fish, prowling cats, a broken die, half a dice, looking big in the frame of my thick, probably bulletproof window. The men opened their doors, and then mine. Out. I climbed out and stood by the car, blinking. You were causing some kind of trouble in that neighborhood back there, the driver announced. Really, officers. What's your name? Hilliard Turner. We don't want you going back there again, Turner, causing trouble. Understand? Officer, I only bought some books. Magazines. These? The second man, Carl, asked. He had retrieved them from the back seat. Look here, Sarge. They look pretty dirty. Sarge took up the Sky Fighters with the girl in the elastic flying suit. Filth, he said. You know about the laws governing pornography, Turner. Those aren't pornography, and they are my property. I reached for them, and Carl pulled them back, grinning.
You don't want to read these. They aren't good for you. We're confiscating them.
Look here, I'm a citizen. You can't. Carl shoved me back a little.
Can't we?
Sarge stepped in front of me, his face in deadly earnest.
How about it, Turner? You a narcotics user?
He grabbed my wrist and started rolling up my sleeve to look for needle marks. I twisted away from him.
Resisting an officer,
Sarge said almost sadly. At that, Carl loped up beside him. The two of them started to beat me. They hit clean, in the belly and guts, but not in the groin. They gave me clean white flashes of pain instead of angry, red-streaked ones. I didn't fight back, not against the two of them. I knew that much. I didn't even try to block their blows. I stood with my arms at my sides, leaning back against the car, and hearing myself grunt at each blow. They stood away from me and let me fold helplessly to the greasy brick.
Stay away from that neighborhood and stay out of trouble,
Sarge's voice said above me. I looked up a little bit and saw an ugly, battered hand thumbing across a stack of half a dozen magazines like a giant deck of cards.
Why don't you take up detective stories? He asked me.
I never heard the squad car drive away. Home. I lighted the living room from the door, looked around for intruders for the first time I could remember, and went inside. I threw myself on the couch and rubbed my stomach. I wasn't hurt badly. My middle was going to be sorer in the morning than it was now. Lighting up a cigarette, I watched the shapes of smoke and tried to think. I looked at it objectively, forward and back. The solution was obvious. First of all, I positively could not have been an aviator in World War I. I was in my mid-20s. Anybody could tell that by looking at me. The time was the late 50s. Anybody could tell that from the blank-faced Motorola in the corner, the new Edsels on the street. Memories of air combat in Spad and Nieuport, stirred in me by the old magazines. Quentin Reynolds and reruns of Dawn Patrol on television were mere hallucinations. Neither could I remember drinking bootleg hooch in speakeasies, hearing Floyd Gibbons announce the Dempsey-Tunney flight, or paying $3.80 to get into the first run of Gone with the Wind. Only, I probably had seen GWTW. Hadn't I gone with my mother to a matinee? Didn't she pay 90 cents for me? So how could I remember taking a girl, brunette, red sweater, Kathy, and paying $3.80 each? I couldn't. Different runs. That was it. The thing had been around half a dozen times. But would it have been $3.80 no more than 10 years ago? I struck up a new cigarette. The thing I must remember, I told myself, was that my recollections were false and unreliable. It would do me no good to keep following these false memories in a closed curve. I touched my navel area and flinched. The beating. The beating, I was confident, had been real. But it had been a nightmare. Those cops couldn't have been true. They were a small boy's bad dream about symbolized authority. They were keeping me from re-entering the past where I belonged, punishing me to make me stay in my trap of the present. Oh, God. I rolled over on my face and pushed it into the upholstery. That was the worst part of it. False memories, feelings of persecution, that was one thing. Believing that you are actively caught up in a mixture of the past with the present, a Dali-esque viscosity of reality, was something else. I needed help. Or, if there was no help for me, it was my duty to have myself placed where I couldn't harm other consumers. If there was one thing that working for an advertising agency had taught me, it was social responsibility. I took up the phone book and located several psychiatrists. I selected one at random, for no particular reason. Dr. Ernest G. Rickenbacker. I memorized the address and heaved myself to my feet. The doctor's office was as green as the inside of a mentholated cigarette commercial. The cool, lovely receptionist told me to wait, and I did, tasting mint inside my mouth. After several long, peaceful minutes, the inner door opened. "Mr. Turner, I can't seem to find any record of an appointment for you in Dr. Rickenbacker's files," the man said. I got to my feet. "Then I'll come back." He took my arm. "No, no, I can fit you in. I didn't have an appointment. I just came." "I understand. Maybe I had better go." "I won't hear of it." I could have pulled loose from him, but somehow I felt that if I did try to pull away, the grip would tighten and I would never get away. I looked up into that long, hard, blank face that seemed so recently familiar. "I'm Dr. Sargent," he said. "I'm taking care of Dr. Rickenbacker's practice for him while he is on vacation." I nodded. What I was thinking could only be another symptom of my illness. He led me inside and closed the door. The door made a strange sound in closing. It didn't go snick bonk. It made a noise like click clack clunk. "Now," he said, "would you like to lie down on the couch and tell me about it? Some people have preconceived ideas that I don't want to fight with that I don't want to fight with at the beginning. Or if you prefer, you can sit there in front of my desk and tell me all about it. Remember, I'm a psychiatrist, a doctor, not just a psychoanalyst." I took possession of the chair, and Sargent faced me across his desk. "I feel," I said, "that I am caught up in some kind of time travel." "I see. Have you read much science fiction, Mr. Turner?" "Some. I read a lot. All kinds of books. Tolstoy, Twain, Hemingway, Luke Short, John D. MacDonald, Huxley." "You should read them instead of live them. Catharsis. Sublimate, Mr. Turner. For instance, to a certain type of person, I often recommend the mysteries of Mickey Spillane." I seemed to be losing control of the conversation. "But this time travel. Mr. Turner, do you really believe in time travel?" "No." "Then how can there be any such thing? It can't be real." "I know that. I want to be cured of imagining it." "The first step is to utterly renounce the idea. Stop thinking about the past. Think of the future." "How did you know I keep slipping back into the past?" I asked. Sargent's hands were more expressive than his face. "You mentioned time travel." "But not to the past or to the future," I said. "But you did, Mr. Turner. You told me all about thinking you could go into the past by visiting a book where the story sold old magazines. You told me how the intrusion of the past got worse with every visit." I blinked. "I did? I did?" "Of course." I stood up. "I did not!" "Please try to keep from getting violent, Mr. Turner. People like you actually have more control over themselves than you realize. If you will yourself to be calm—" "I know I didn't tell you a thing about the back number store. I'm starting to think I'm not crazy at all. You're trying to do something to me. You're all in it together." Sargent shook his head sadly. I realized how it all sounded. "Good God!" I moaned. I put my face to my hand. Whoops! I put my hands to my face, and I felt the vein over my left eye swelling, pulsing. Through the bars of my fingers, I saw Sargent motion me down with one eloquent hand. I took my hands away. I didn't like looking through bars, and sat down. "Now," Sargent said, steepling his fingers, "I know of a completely nice place in the country. Of course, if you respond properly—" Those hands of his. There was something about them that wasn't so. They might have been the hands of a corpse or a doll. I lurched across the desk and grabbed his wrist. "Please, Mr. Turner, violence will—" My fingers clawed at the backs of his hands, and my nails dragged off ugly strips of some theatrical stuff. Collodion, I think, that had covered the scrapes and bruises he had taken hammering away at me in my belt buckle. Sergeant. Sarge. I let go of him and stood away. For the first time, Sargent smiled. I backed to the door and turned the knob behind my back. It wouldn't open. I turned around and rattled it, pulled on it, braced my foot against the wall, and tugged. "Locked," Sargent supplied. He was coming toward me, I could tell. I wheeled and faced him. He had a hypodermic needle. It was the smallest one I had ever seen, and it had an iridescence or luminosity about it, a gleaming silver dart. I closed with him. By the way he moved, I knew he was used to physical combat, but you can't win them all, and I had been in a lot of scraps when I had been younger. Hadn't I? I stepped in while he was trying to decide whether to use the hypo on me or drop it to have his hands free. I stiff-handed him in the solar plexus and crossed my fist into the hollow of the apex arch of his jawbone. He dropped. I gave him a kick at the base of his spine. He grunted and lay still. There was a rapping on the door. "Doctor? Doctor?" I searched through his pockets. He didn't have any keys. He didn't have any money or identification or a gun. He had a handkerchief and a ballpoint pen. The receptionist had moved away. From the door and was talking to somebody, in person or on the phone or intercom. There wasn't any back door. I went to the window. The city stretched out in an impressive panorama. On the street below, traffic crawled. There was a ledge. Quite a wide, old-fashioned ornamental ledge. The ledge ran beneath the windows of all the offices on this floor. The 14th, I remembered. I had seen it done in movies all my life. Harold Lloyd, Douglas Fairbanks, Buster Keaton were always doing it for some reason or other. I had a good reason. I unlatched the window and climbed out into the dry, crisp breeze. The movies didn't know much about convection. The updraft nearly killed me off the ledge, but the cornice was so wide I could keep out of the wind if I kept myself flat against the side of the building. The next window was about 20 feet away. I had covered half that distance, moving my feet with a sideways crab motion, when Carl, indisputably the second policeman, put his head out of the window where I was heading and pointed a .38 revolver at me, saying in a let's have no foolishness tone, "Get in here." I went the other way. The cool, lovely receptionist was in Sargent's window with the tiny silver needle in readiness. I kept shuffling toward the girl. I had decided I would rather wrestle with her over the needle than fight Carl over the rod. Idiotically, I smiled at that idea. I slipped. I was falling down the 14 stories without even a moment of windmilling for balance. I was just gone. Lines were converging, and I was converging on the lines. You aren't going to be able to Immelman out of this dive, Turner. Goodbye, Turner. Death. A sleep, a reawakening, a lie. It's nothing like that. It's nothing. The end of everything you ever were or ever could be. I hit. My kneecap hurt like hell. I had scraped it badly. Reality was all over me in patches. I showed through as a line drawing, crudely done, a cartoon. Some kind of test projection. Some kind of projection. High test cinerama. That was all reality meant. I was kneeling on a hard surface no more than 6 feet from the window from which I had fallen. I was still 14 flights up, more or less, but down was broken and splattered all over me. I stood up, moving forward a step. It brought me halfway through the screen, halfway through the wall at the base of the building. The other side of the screen. The solid side, I found, stepping through, bracing a hand on the image. Looking up 14 floors, I saw an unbroken line of peacefully closed panes. I remembered riding up in the elevator, the moments inside, the faint feeling of vertigo. Of course, who was to say the elevator really moved? Maybe they had only switched scenery on me while I was caught inside, listening to the phony hum, seeing the flashing lights. Either cut down or increase the oxygen supply inside the cubicle suddenly, and that would contribute a sensation of change, of movement. They had it all worked out. My fingers rubbed my head briskly, both hands working, trying to get some circulation in my brain. I guessed I had to run. There didn't seem much else to do. I ran. Get help? Not this old lady and her daughter. Not this Neanderthal sailor on his way to a bar and a blonde. Not the bookkeeper. Maybe the car salesman, ex-army. Lions Club member, beefy, respectable, well-intentioned, not a complete fool. The guy on the corner reading a newspaper by the bus stop. I need help, I panted to him. Somebody's trying to kidnap me. Really makes you sick to hear about something like that, doesn't it? He said. I'm in favor of the Lindbergh law myself. I'm not sure whether this heat is murder, isn't it? Especially here in these concrete canyons. Sometimes I wish I was back in Springfield. Cool, shaded streets. Listen to me. These people, they're conspiring against me, trying to drive me insane. 2 men, a girl. For my money, Marilyn Monroe is the doll of the world. I just don't understand these guys who say she hasn't got class. She gets class by satirizing girls without any. He was like anybody you might talk to on the street. I knew what he would say if I cued him with baseball or Russia instead of the keywords I had used. I should have known better, but I wanted to touch him in some way, make him know I was alive. I grabbed him and shook him by the shoulders, and there was a whoosh, and as I might have expected, he collapsed like the insubstantiality he was. There was a stick figure of a man left before me, an economical skeleton supporting the shell of a human being, two-thirds of a two-trouser suit. Hide. I went into the first shop I came to, Milady's Personals. Appropriately, it was a false front. A neutral-colored gray surface, too smooth for concrete, stretched away into some shadows. The area was littered with trash. Cartons, bottles, what looked like the skin of a dehydrated human being. Obviously, on second thought, only the discarded skin of one of the things like the one I had deflated. And a moldering pile of letters and papers. Something caught my eye and I kicked through them. Yes, the letter I had written to my brother in Sioux Falls, unopened, and which he had answered. My work. The work I had done at the agency. Important, creative work. There was my layout, the rough of the people with the short, slim glasses, the parents, children, grandparents, the caption, "Vodka is a part of the American tradition." All of it, lying here to rot. Something made me look away from that terrible trash. Sargent stood in the entrance of Milady's, something bright in his hand. Something happened. I had been wrong. The shining instrument had not been a hypodermic needle. You're tough, Sergeant said as I eased back into focus. You aren't, not without help, I told him in disgust.
Spunky, aren't you? I meant mental toughness. That's the one thing we can never judge. I think you could have taken the shock right from the start. Of course, you would still have needed the conditioning to integrate properly.
Conditioning? Conditioning? It came out of me, vortexing up outside of my piloting. What have you done to my mind?
We've been trying to get it to grow back up, Sergeant said reasonably. Think of this: fountain of youth, immortality, rejuvenation. This is it. Never mind how it works. Most minds can't stand being young and knowing they will have to go through the same damned thing all over again. We use synapse shift to switch your upper conscious memories to your id and superego, leaving room for new memories. You remember only those things out of the past you have to retain your identity.
Identity, I repeated. I have no identity. My identity is a dream. I have two identities, one of them years beyond the other. Sergeant tilted his head and his eyes at me and slapped me across the face.
Don't go back on me now. We gave you the best we could. The rejuvenation service couldn't help it if you were too old for a beta. You shouldn't have waited until you were so old, so very old. We used the very oldest sets and mock-ups we had for betas, but you had to keep wandering onto alpha territory while they were striking sets even. Beta or not, we gave you good service. Don't slip now.
I heard the voice, and I heard another voice, and it said, "What could you expect of a beta?" And they were only some of the voices I was hearing, and I wondered what you could expect from a beta, and I didn't know, or think that I would ever know. And that was The Heir of Castor Oil by Jim Harmon. I'm not paranoid. Are you paranoid? I'm not paranoid at all. No, sir. Just because you're paranoid doesn't mean somebody isn't out to get you. Daily reminder that trust nobody. All right. Lastly, we've got the big fix. Once I fit it to the screen here. Fit it to the screen because it's so green with what looks like a stylized blue 5. I don't know what that is. It's like an image made by an AI except coherent. Oh man. Do not use one of those AI algorithmic image generation things. Those make me feel all kinds of heebie-jeebie. Give me one second. I'm getting some auxiliary replacement water. I'll be right back. Sorry about that. What is that white square? And why is it there? Did I scooch something somewhere? Why is it doing 2? Oh, I see what it's doing. That's not okay. There we go. Much better. All right. I'll just have to remember to turn that on later. All right. Cheryl. This is the last one I'm doing for today. The Big Fix by George O. Smith. It is cribbed liberally. I've skimmed this one. I have not read any of these that we've done today. That last one, where it ended, just ended. I'm like, okay, where's the rest of the book, though? This one, I skimmed it. It's, oh God, I can't remember the actor's name. And it's a classic. It's a great movie. It's about, it's a racetrack heist. And it is, I would say that, in my opinion, it is one of the quintessential noir heist movies of all time. Like, it absolutely everything it does. And I think it's called The Fix. Uh, it's this is similar, um, or has a similar premise. The events don't look like they correspond all that well, but it's similar. Really good movie. If I could remember the principal actors in it, that would help. Um, Black and white. I think it is from the 50s. Might have been 40s. Might have been 40s. If this is written and seems to be aping it, then probably 40s, but I can't remember. Alrighty, so The Big Fix. Just some guys are at a poker table. They're smoking. They got big ass popped collars and leopard print ties, and oh my god, these guys have style. I don't care what anyone says. Give me a moment. The Big Fix by George O. Smith. Anyone who holds that telepathy and psi powers would mean an end to crime quite obviously underestimates the ingenuity of the human race. Now consider a horse race that had to be fixed. It was April, a couple of weeks before the Derby. We were playing poker, which is a game of skill that has nothing to do with the velocity of horse meat. Phil Howland kept slipping open, but he managed to close up before I could tell whether the combination of 3-5-2-4 meant a full house of fives over fours, or whether he was betting on an open-ended straight that he hadn't bothered to arrange in order as he held them. The Greek was impenetrable. He also blocked me from reading the deck so that I could estimate his hand from the cards that weren't dealt out. Chicago Charlie's mind was easy to read, but no one could trust him. He was just as apt to think high to score someone out as he was to think low to suck the boys in. As for me, there I was, good old Wally Wilson, holding a pat straight flush from the 8 to the queen of diamonds. I was thinking full house, but I was betting like a weak 3 of a kind. It was a terrific game. Between trying to read these other guys' brains and keeping them from opening mine, and blocking the Greek's sly stunt of tipping over the poker chips as a distraction, I was also concerned about the $8,000 that was in the pot. The trouble was that all 4 of us fully intended to rake it in. My straight flush would be good for the works in any normal game with wild cards, but the way this bunch was betting, I couldn't be sure. Phil Howland didn't have much of a shield, but he could really read, and if he read me, either my mind or my hand, he'd automatically radiate, and that would be that. I was about at the point of calling for the draw when the door opened without any knock. It was Tomboy Taylor. We'd been so engrossed with one another that none of us had caught her approach. The Greek looked up at her and swore something that he hadn't read in Plato. "Showdown," he said, tossing in his hand. I grunted and spread my 5 beauties. Phil growled and shoved the pot in my direction, keeping both eyes on Tomboy Taylor. She was something to keep eyes on, both figuratively and literally.
The only thing that kept her from being a thionite dream was the Pittsburgh stogie that she insisted upon smoking. And the only thing that kept her from being some man's companion, in spite of the stogie, was the fact that he'd have to keep his mouth shut or she'd steal his back teeth. If not for the fillings, then for practice.
Yo, Wally Wilson, she said around the cigar. Get these grifters out of here. I got words.
The Greek growled.
Who says?
Barcelona says.
I do not have to explain who Barcelona is. All I have to say is that Phil Howland, the Greek, and Chicago Charlie arose without a word and filed out with their minds all held tight behind solid shields. I said, "What does Barcelona want with me?" Tomboy Taylor removed the stogie and said evenly,
Barcelona wants to see it fly in heels, Moonbeam, and Lady Grace next month.
When I got done gulping, I said, "You mean Barcelona wants me to fix the Kentucky Derby?"
Oh, no,
she replied in a very throaty contralto that went with her figure and her $1,000 worth of simple skirt and blouse.
you needn't fix anything. Just be sure that it's Flying Heels, Moonbeam, and Lady Grace in that order. 1, 2, 3. Do I make Barcelona quite clear?
I said, "Look, Tomboy, neither of them platers can even run that far, let alone running ahead."
Barcelona says they can and will. Sorry, I'm changing the voices up. You're just gonna have to live with it.
I'm not doing
I'm not doing a shrill, obnoxious voice when it says
throaty contralto. Sorry, it's not in the cards.
get it, get it, get it.
Barcelona says they can and will. She leaned forward and stubbed out the Pittsburgh stogie, and in the gesture she became wholly beautiful as well as beautifully wholesome. As she leaned toward me, she unfogged the lighter surface of her mind and let me dig the faintly leaking concept that she considered me physically attractive. This did not offend me. To the contrary, it pleased my ego mightily, until Tomboy Taylor deliberately let the barrier down to let me read the visual impression, which included all of the implications contained in the old cliché.
And don't he look natural?
How, I asked on the recoil, can I fix the Derby?
Barcelona says you know more about the horse racing business than any other big-time operator in Chicago, she said smoothly. Barcelona says that he doesn't know anything about horse racing at all, but he has great faith in your ability. Barcelona says that if anybody can make it Flying Heels, Moonbeam, and Lady Grace 1, 2, and 3, Wally Wilson is the man who can do it. In fact, Barcelona will be terribly disappointed if you can't. I eyed her carefully. She was a composed and poised beauty who looked entirely incapable of uttering such words. I tried to peer into her mind, but it was like trying to read the fine print of a telephone directory through a knitted woolen shawl. But she smiled at me, her shapely lips curving graciously. I said, "Barcelona seems to have a lot of confidence in my ability to arrange things." With those delicate lips still curved sweetly, she said, "Barcelona is willing to bet money on your ability as a manager." At this point, Tomboy Taylor fished another Pittsburgh stogie out of her $100 handbag, bit off the end with a quick nibble of even, pearly white teeth, with a smoking habit, I think not, and stuffed the cigar in between the arched lips. She scratched a big kitchen match on the seat of her skirt, after raising one shapely thigh to stretch the cloth. She puffed the stogie into light, and became transformed from a beauty into a hag. My mind swore. It was like painting a mustache on the Mona Lisa. Out of the corner of her mouth, she replied to my unspoken question. "It helps to keep grippers like you at mind's length." Then she left me with my littered card table and $8,000 final pot, and the unhappy recollection that Barcelona had gotten upset at something Harold Grimmer had done, and he'd gone into Grimmer's place and busted Grimmer flat by starting with one lousy buck and letting it ride through 18 straight passes.
This feat of skill was performed under the mental noses of about 8 operators trained to exert their extrasensory talents toward the defeat of sharpshooters who tried to add paraphysics into the laws of chance. Lieutenant Delancey of the Chicago Police came in an hour later. He refused my offer of a drink and a smoke, and then, because I didn't wave him to a chair, he crossed my living room briskly and eased himself into my favorite chair. I think I could have won the waiting game, but the prize wasn't good enough to interest me in playing. So I said, "Okay, Lieutenant, what am I supposed to be guilty of?" His smile was veiled. "You're not guilty of anything, so far as I know." "You're not here to pass the time of day." "No, I'm not. I want information." "What kind of information?" "One hears things," he said vaguely. "Lieutenant," I said, "you've been watching one of those Hallucine whodunit dramas where everybody stands around making witty sayings composed of disconnected phrases. You'll next be saying, 'Evil lurks in the minds of men,' in a sepulchral intonation. Let's skip it, huh? What kind of things does one hear, and from whom?" "It starts with Gimpy Gordon." "Whose mind meanders?" He shrugged. "Gimpy Gordon's meandering mind is well understood for what it is," he said, "but when it ceases to meander long enough to follow a single train of thought from beginning to logical end, then something is up." "Such as what, for instance?" The lieutenant leaned back in my easy chair and stared at the ceiling. "Wally," he said, "I was relaxing in the car with Sergeant Holliday driving. We passed a certain area on Michigan near Randolph, and I caught the strong mental impression of someone who, in this day and age, mind you, had the temerity to pickpocket a wallet containing $27. The sum of $27 was connected with the fact that the rewards made the risk worth taking. There were distinct impressions of playing that $27 across the board on 3 very especial nags at the Derby. The impression of the $27 changed into a mental vision of a hand holding a sack of peanuts. There was indecision. Should he take more risk and run up his available cash to make a larger killing? Or would one Joseph Barcelona take a standoffish attitude if some outsider were to lower the track odds by betting a bundle on Flying Heels, Moonbeam, and Lady Grace? I said, "Lieutenant, you've got a pickpocket to jug. Horse betting is legal." "Since wagering on the speed of a horse has been redefined as the purchase of one corporate share to be valid for one transaction only and redeemable at a par value to be established by the outcome of this aforesaid single transaction, horse betting is legal. This makes you an investment counselor, short-term transactions only, and removes you from the odious nomenclature of bookie. However, permit me to point out that the buying and selling of shares of horseflesh does not grant a license to manipulate the outcome." "You sound as though you're accusing me of contemplating a fix." "Oh, no, not that." "Then what?" "Wally, Flying Heels, Moonbeam, and Lady Grace were refused by the National Association of Dog Food Canners because of their substandard health. If I'm not mistaken, the Derby Association would have to run the race early that Saturday afternoon." "Early?" "Uh-huh, early. You see, Wally, the blue laws of the bluegrass state make it illegal to run horse races on Sunday. Hence, the start of the Derby must be early enough to let our 3 platers complete the race before midnight." "Lieutenant, there still stands a mathematical probability that—"
"That the rest of the field will catch the Martian glanders as they lead our 3 dogs past the clubhouse turn?"
"Lieutenant, you're wronging me."
"I haven't said a thing."
"Then why have you come here to bedevil me, Lieutenant? If Barcelona has ideas of arranging a fix—"
"If Barcelona has such notions, Wally Wilson would know about it."
"Everybody," I said,
entertains notions of cleaning up a bundle by having the 100-to-1 shot come in by a length. Even Barcelona must have wild dreams now and then.
Come off it, he snapped. Something's up, and I want to know what's cooking.
Lieutenant, you are now asking me to describe to you how someone might rig the Kentucky Derby in a world full of expert telepaths and perceptives and manipulators, a large number of which will be rather well paid to lend their extrasensory power to the process of keeping the Derby pure. He eyed me sourly.
Remember Fireman O'Leary?
That's an unfair allegation, I replied. The rumor that he started the Chicago fire is absolutely unfounded.
As I recall, Fireman O'Leary came by his nickname about 100 years after the Holocaust that started on DeKoven Street in 1871. It seems that Fireman O'Leary was most useful in helping the Phillies home at Washington Park by assaulting them in the region of the bangtail with small bollops of pure incandescence. He was a pyrotic.
That is a false accusation.
It was never proved, admitted the lieutenant, because anyone who accused anybody of making use of extrasensory faculties in 1971 would have been tossed into that establishment out on Narragansett Avenue where the head shrinkers once plied their mystic trade.
Things are different now.
Indeed they are, Wally, which is why I'm here. No one but a fumbling idiot would try anything as crude as speeding a dog over the line by pyrotics or by jolting the animals with a bolt of electrical energy.
So,
Considering the sad and sorry fact that human nature does not change very much despite the vast possibility for improvement, we must anticipate a fix that has been contrived and executed on a level that takes full cognizance of the widespread presence of psi function.
but again, why me?
Was not Fireman O'Leary an ancestor of yours?
He was my maternal grandparent.
And so you do indeed come from a long line of horse operators, don't you?
I resent your invidious implications.
And wasn't Wireless Wilson the paternal ancestor from whom the family name has come?
I fail to see. The allegation that my father's father employed telepathy to transmit track information faster than the wire services has never been proved. He smiled knowingly.
Wally, he said slowly, if you feel that allegations have somehow impugned the pure name of your family, you could apply for a review of their several appearances in court. It's possible that Fireman O'Leary did not use his pyrotic talent to enhance the running speed of some tired old dogs.
But
So I think we understand one another, Wally. There is also reason to believe that psionic talent tends to run in families. You're a psi man, and a good one.
if I hear of anything,
You'll let me know, he said flatly. And if Flying Heels, Moonbeam, and or Lady Grace even so much as succeed in staying on their feet for the whole race, I'll be back demanding how you, Wally Wilson, managed to hold them up.
after which the good Lieutenant Delancey left me to my thoughts, which were most uncomfortable. Barcelona had to be kept cheerful, but the dogs he'd picked could only come in first unassisted if they happened to be leading the field at the start if they happened to be leading the field that started the next race, and even then post time would have to be delayed to give them a longer head start. That meant that if our three platers came awake, everybody would be looking for the fix. Anybody who planned a caper would sure have to plan it well. Barcelona hadn't planned the fix. He merely stated a firm desire, and either Barcelona got what he wanted, or I got what I didn't want, and I had to do it real good, or Delancey would make it real hot for me. I was not only being forced to enter a life of crime, I was also being forced to perform cleverly. It wasn't fair for the law to gang up with the crooks against me. And so, with a mind feeling sort of like the famous sparrow who'd gotten trapped for 3 hours in a badminton game at Forest Hills, I built a strong highball and poured it down while my hallucence set was warming up. I needed the highball as well as the relaxation, because I knew that the drama being presented was the 100 and umpty-umpth remake of Tarzan of the Apes, and for 90 solid minutes I would be swinging through trees without benefit of alcohol. Tarzan, you'll remember, did not learn to smoke and drink until the second book. Reference game is on point. I don't know why I'm confusing words. It's one of those days, I guess. The hallucence did relax me, and kept my mind from its worry, even though the drama was cast for kids and therefore contained a maximum of tree swinging and ape gymnastics, and a near dearth of Lady Jane's pleasant company. What was irritating was the traces of wrong aroma. If one should not associate the African jungle with the aroma of a cheap bar, one should be forgiven for objecting to Lady Jane with a strong flavor of tobacco and cheap booze on her breath. And so I awoke with this irritating conflict in my senses to discover that I'd dropped out of my character as Tarzan and my surroundings of the jungle, but I'd somehow brought the stench of cheap liquor and moist cigarettes with me. There was an occupant in the chair next to mine. He needed a bath and he needed a shave, but both would have been wasted if he couldn't change his clothing, too. His name was Gimpy Gordon. I said, "Get out." He whined,
Mr. Wilson, you just gotta help me.
"How?"
For years, he said, I've been living on peanuts. I've been running errands for hard coins. I've been
"Swiping the take of a Red Cross box," I snapped at him.
Oh, Mr. Wilson, I simply gotta make a stake. I'm a going to send it back when I win.
"Are you going to win?"
Can I? Can't I?
For a moment I toyed with the idea of being honest with the Gimp. Somehow, someone should tell the duffer that all horse players die broke, or that if he could make a living, I'd be out of business. Gimpy Gordon was one of life's unfortunates. If it were to rain gold coins, Gimpy would be out wearing boxing gloves. His mental processes meandered because of too much methyl. His unfortunate nickname did not come from the old-fashioned reason that he walked with a limp, but from the even more unfortunate reason that he thought with a limp. In his own unhealthy way, he was, could we call it lucky by any standard of honesty? In this world full of highly developed psi talent, the Gimp could pick a pocket and get away with it because he often literally could not remember where and how he'd acquired the wallet for longer than a half minute. And it was a sort of general unwritten rule that any citizen so utterly befogged as to permit his wealth to be lifted via light fingers should lose it as a lesson. But then it did indeed occur to me that maybe I could make use of the Gimp. I said, "What can I do, Gimpy?"
Mr. Wilson, he pleaded, is it true that you're working for Barcelona?
Now, you know I can't answer that. I could read his mind struggling with this concept. It was sort of like trying to read a deck of Chinese fortune cards being shuffled before they're placed in the machine at the penny arcade. As the drunk once said after reading the telephone directory, "Not much plot, but egad, what a cast of characters!" The gist of his mental the gist of his mental maundering was a childlike desire to have everything sewed up tight. He wanted to win, to be told that he'd win, and to have all the rules altered ad hoc to assure his winning. Just where he'd picked up the inside dope that Barcelona favored Flying Heels, Moonbeam, and Lady Grace in the Derby, I could not dig out of him. Just how Gimpy had made the association between this clambake and me, good old Wally Wilson, I couldn't dig either. But here he was with his, by now, $65 carefully heisted, lifted, pinched, and fingered, and by the great Harry, Gimpy was not a-going to lay it across the board on those three rejects from a claiming race unless he had a cast iron assurance that they'd come in across the board, 1, 2, and 3. I said slowly, "If
were even thinking of working for Mr. Barcelona, I told him, I would be very careful never to mention it, you know. This bundle of the awful truth hit him and began to sink in with the inexorable absorption of water dropping down into a bucket of dry sand. It took some time for the process to climax. Once it reached home base, it took another period of time for the information to be inspected, sorted out, identified, analyzed, and in a very limited degree, understood. He looked up at me.
I couldn't cuff 100, could I?
I shook my head. I didn't have to veil my mind because I knew that Gimpy was about as talented a telepath as a tallow candle. Frankly, between me and thee, dear reader, I do not put anybody's bet on the cuff. I do a fair to middling brisk trade in booking bets placed and discussed by telepathy, but the ones I accept and pay off on, if they're lucky, are those folks who've been sufficiently foresighted to lay it on the line with a retainer against which their losses can be assessed. On the other hand, I could see in Gimpy's mind the simple logic that told him that as a bookmaker I'd be disinclined to lend him money which he'd use to place with me against a sure thing long shot. If I were to lend him a century for an off-the-cuff bet on a 100-to-1 horse, especially one that I knew was sure to come in, I might better simply hand him 100 times the $100 as a gift. It would save a lot of messy bookkeeping. So, the fact that I wouldn't cuff a bet for Gimpy gave him his own proof that I was confirming the fix. Then I buttered the process. Gimp, do you know another good bookmaker?
Sure, but you're the best.
No one that'll take a bet from you? One that you don't like?
Sure, Mr. Wilson.
Then, I said, hauling 1,000 out of my wallet, put this on our horses for me. He eyed the grand.
But won't Mr. Barcelona be unhappy? Won't that run down the track odds?
I laughed. The whole world knows them dogs are also ran. The whole world knows them dogs is also rans, I said. Gimpy, they put long shots like those into races just to clip the suckers who think there is a real 100-to-1 chance that a 100-to-1 horse will outrun favorites.
Well, if you say so, Mr. Wilson.
I say so.
Thanks. I'll pay it back.
He would. I'd see to that. Gimpy Gordon scuttled out of my bailiwick almost on a dead run. He was positively radiating merriment and joy and excitement. The note in his hand represented a sum greater than he had ever seen in one piece at any time of his life, and the concept of the riches he would know when they paid off on the Kentucky Derby was vague simply because Gimpy could not grasp the magnitude of such magnificence. Oddly, for some unexpected reason or from some unknown source hidden deep in his past, his mind pronounced it Darby. I returned to my African jungle, still bored with the lack of anything constructive. I returned at about the point where Tarzan and Jane were going through that silly "me Tarzan, you Jane" routine, which was even more irritating because the program director, or someone, had muffed the perfume that the Lady Jane wore. Instead of the wholesome freshness of the free, open air, Jane was wearing a heady, spicy scent engineered to cut its way through the blocking barrier of stale cigar smoke, whiskey-laden second-hand air, and a waft of cooking aroma from the kitchen of the standard cosmopolitan bistro. Worse, it got worse instead of better. Where a clever effects director might have started with the heavy, sophisticated scent and switched to something lighter and airier as Jane moved away from civilization, this one had done it backwards for some absolutely ridiculous reason. It finally got strong enough to distract me out of my characterization, and I came back to reality to realize once more that reality had been strong enough to cut into the concentration level of a hallucence. There was strong woman presence in my room, and as I looked around I found that Tomboy Taylor had come in,
just as Gimpy Gordon had, and was sitting on the other Hallucent's chair. She was probably playing Lady Jane to my Tarzan. Tomboy Taylor had changed to a short-skirted, low-necked cocktail dress. Relaxed with her eyes closed in my Hallucent's chair, she looked lovely. She looked as vulnerable as a soft kitten. Remembering that it's the soft, vulnerable ones that claw you if you touch, I refrained. I went to my little bar and refilled my highball glass because swinging through the jungle makes one thirsty, and while I was pouring, I took a sly peek into Tomboy Taylor's mind. She was not hallucensing. Hallucining. Oh no, have I been pronouncing it wrong the entire time because I can't read? Ah! I absolutely have. I'm sorry. So every time I've said the word hallucence, it's hallucine. And, my bad. I can't read. It's alright. I do this every week, and I still can't read. Very nice. Okay, where were we? She was not hallucining. Hallucining. Hallucining? Hallucining. Hallu...
Now I'm doubting everything. Everything is a lie. It's all a set that they built around me to make me think that I'm a real person and to reintegrate my memories into the ancient body that I'm in that's been regenerated, but I'm a beta, not an alpha.
That previous story has me really messed up. Philip K. Dick would be proud. That was very Philip K. Dick in terms of just like, oh my god, the world is a lie. Back to what we're doing. She was not hallucinating. She was watching me. And when I made contact with her, she radiated a sort of overall aura of amusement emotion, covered up her conscious deliberation, and blocked any probing by directing me mentally. Make it two, Wally. I built her one, handed it to her, and then said, Folks these days sure have forgotten how to use doorbells. If you don't want people coming in, Wally, you should restrict your mind warden a little. It's set to admit anybody who does not approach the door with vigorous intent to commit grave physical harm. When the thing radiates, come in and relax, is a girl supposed to stand outside twiggling on the doorbell? I dropped the subject, thinking that maybe I shouldn't have brought it up in the first place. It's one that can't be answered by logic, whereas a firm emotional statement of like or dislike stops all counter-argument, and I'd made the mistake of questioning my own judgment. So I eyed her and said, Tomboy, you did not come here to indulge in small talk. No, she admitted. I'm here to keep track of you, Wally. No? Our great and good friend wants me to make notes on how clever you are at arranging things. You mean Barcelona sent you? That's about it. I looked at her askance. How long are you going to stay? She smiled. Until Flying Heels, Moonbeam, and Lady Grace come across the finish line 1, 2, and 3 at Churchill Downs on Derby Day. I grinned at her. Considering that trio of turtles, Tomboy, it may be for years and it may be forever. She held up her glass in a sort of toast. Or, she said, till death do us part. A little bitterly, I said, one might think that Barcelona doesn't trust me. She replied, It isn't a matter of trust. Barcelona holds you among his very closest friends. He is aware of the fact that you would do anything for him, that you prize his friendship so highly yourself that you would go to the most desperate lengths to keep it firm and true. Yet he realizes that the simple desire he has recently expressed does place you in a delicate mental attitude. You are likely to feel that he shouldn't have expressed this desire since you feel obligated to fulfill it. He feels that maybe this obligation to maintain friendship at all costs may cause resentment. Since Barcelona does not want you to resent him, he sent me to be your companion, in the hope that I might get some forewarning should your friendship for him begin to weaken. Just why, in this day and age, she didn't just come out and say, or think, flatly that she was there to keep me in line, I don't know. But there she was, talking all around the main point and delivering the information by long-winded inference.
Even so, without her Pittsburgh stogie, Tomboy Taylor was a mighty attractive dish, and I knew that she could also be a bright and interesting conversationalist if she wanted to be. Under others, under other, I'm sorry. Under other circumstances, I might have enjoyed the company, but it was no pleasure to know that every grain of her 114 pounds avoirdupois was Barcelona's personal property. At that moment, I realized I was not too much concerned with what Barcelona's reaction might be. Instead, I was wishing that things were different, so that any activity between us would be for our own personal gain and pleasure, rather than the order of or the fight against one Joseph Barcelona. There was one consolation. Tomboy Taylor had not come equipped with a box of Pittsburgh stogies with which to make my appreciation of beauty throw up its lunch. She said, sweetly, "The better to ensnare you, my dear." But as she spoke, for just a moment, her thick woolly mind shield thinned out enough for me to catch a strange, puzzled grasp for understanding. As if for the first time she had been shown how admiration for physical attractiveness could be both honest and good. That my repugnant attitude over her Pittsburgh stogies was not so much based on the spoiling of beauty by the addition of ugliness, but the fact that the act itself cheapened her in my eyes. Then she caught me peeking and clamped down a mind screen that made the old so-called iron curtain resemble a rusty sieve. "I'm the one that's supposed to keep track of you, remember?" she said, once more covering up and leaping mentally to the attack. "I'll remember," I said, "but will you tell me something?" "Maybe," she said in a veiled attitude. "Is your boyfriend really interested in cleaning up, or is he interested in watching me squirm out of a trap he set for me?" "In the first place," she said, "I may have been seen in Barcelona's presence, but please remember that my association with Mr. Joseph Barcelona has always been strictly on a financial plane. This eliminates the inference contained under the phrase boyfriend. Check?" "Okay, Tomboy, if that's not the way out, the only, what? That's not the only, that, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, ti, la, so, fa, re, re, do." That didn't help. Okay, and I think I did it wrong. Don't worry about it. It's been a while. I haven't been part of a choir in years. "That's not only the way I want it," she said, "but that's the way it always has been and always will be. Second, I have been getting tired of this nickname Tomboy. If we're going to be racked this close together, you'll grate on my nerves less if you use my right name. It's just plain Nora, but I'd like to hear it once in a while." I nodded soberly. I held out a hand, but she put her empty highball glass in it instead of her own little paw. I shrugged and mixed, and when I returned and handed it to her, I said, "I'll make you a deal. I'll call you Nora just so long as you maintain the manners and attitude of a female, feminine, lady-type woman. I'll treat you like a woman, but you've got to earn it. Is that a deal?" That hasn't aged well. This has not aged especially great. She looked at me, her expression shy and as defenseless as a bruiser type caught at reading sentimental poetry. I perceived that I had again touched a sensitive spot by demanding that she be more than physically spectacular. Her defenses went down, and I saw that she really did not know the answer to my question. I did. It had to do with something that only the achievement it had to do with something that only the achievement of a godlike state or extreme old age would change. This time it was not so much the answer to why little boys walk high fences in front of little girls. It had much more to do with the result of what happens between little boys when the little girl hides her baseball bat and straightens the seams of her stockings when one certain little boy comes into sight. Joseph Barcelona did not admire my ability. He had, therefore, caused me to back myself into a corner where I'd be taken down a peg, shown up as a second-rater, with the little girl as a witness. And why had Barcelona been so brash as to send the little girl into my company in order for her to witness my downfall? Let me tell you about Joe Barcelona. I've got to find a way to set this one aside because this story is excellent. This is a noir film right now, and I love it. This is a crime noir story, and I adore it. It hasn't aged well. Its views on women suck, but, 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 it's still fun. Normally honest citizens often complain that Barcelona is living half an Normally honest citizens often complain that Barcelona is living high off on the hog instead of slugging it out in the residence at Stateville, Joliet, Illinois. With their straight-line approach to simple logic, these citizens argue that the advent of telepathy should have rendered the falsehood impossible, and that perception should enable anybody with half a talent to uncover hidden evidence. Then, since Mr. Joseph Barcelona is obviously not languishing in jail, it is patent that the police are not making full use of their talented extrasensory operators, nor the evidence thus collected. And then, after having argued thus, our upstanding citizen will fire off a fast thought to his wife and ask her to invite the neighbors over that evening for a game of bridge. None of these simple type of logicians seem to be aware of the rules for bridge or poker that were in force prior to extrasensory training courses. Since no one recognized psionics, the rules did not take telepathy, perception, manipulation into any consideration whatsoever. Psionics hadn't done away with anything, including the old shell game. Psionics hadn't done away with anything, including the old shell game. All psionics had done was to make the game of chance into a game of skill, and made the game of skill into a game of talent that required better control and longer training in order to gain full proficiency. In Barcelona's case, he had achieved his own apparent immunity by surrounding himself with a number of hirelings who drew a handsome salary for sitting around thinking noisy thoughts. Noisy thoughts, jarring thoughts, stunts like the concentration interrupter of playing the first 20 notes of Brahms' lullaby in perfect pitch and timing, and then playing the 21st note in staccato and a half tone flat. Making mental contact with Barcelona was approximately the analog of eavesdropping upon the intimate cooing of a lover sweet-talking his lady in the middle of a sawmill working on an order 3 days late under a high priority and a penalty clause for delayed delivery. People who wonder how Barcelona can think for himself with all of that terrific mental racket going on do not know that Barcelona is one of those very rare birds who can really concentrate to the whole exclusion of any distraction short of a vigorous threat to his physical well-being. And so, his trick of sending Nora Taylor served a threefold purpose. It indicated his contempt for me. It removed Nora from his zone of interference so that she could really witness firsthand my mental squirmings as I watched my own comeuppance bearing down on me. It also gave him double the telepathic contact with me and my counterplans, if any. In the latter, you see, Barcelona's way of collecting outside information was to order a temporary ceasefire of the mental noise barrage, and then he'd sally forth like a one-man mental commando raid to make a fast grab for what he wanted. Since the best of telepaths cannot read a man's opinion of prunes when he's thinking of peanuts, it is necessary for someone to be thinking of the subject he wants when he makes his raid. Having two in the know and interested doubled his chance for success. There was also the possibility that Barcelona might consider his deliberate leak to Gimpy Gordon ineffective. Most sensible folks are disinclined to treat Gimpy's delusions of grandeur seriously, despite the truth of the cliché that states that a one-to-one correspondence does indeed exist between the perception of smoke and the existence of pyrotic activity. Nora Taylor would add some certification to the rumor. One thing simply had to be. There must be no mistake about placing information in Lieutenant Delancey's hands so as to create the other jaw of the pincers that I was going to be forced to close upon myself. So I guess I lied. This is going to be a long stream today. Sorry.
but I'm too excited. This is too much fun. I'm enjoying myself.
One sec.
I tried a gentle poke in the general direction of Barcelona and found that the mental noise was too much to stand. I withdrew just a bit and closed down the opening until the racket was no more than a mental rumor, and I waited. I hunched that Barcelona would be curious to know how his contact girl was making out, and might be holding a ceasefire early in this phase of the operation. I was right. The noise diminished with the suddenness of turning off a mental switch, and as it stopped, I went in and practically popped Barcelona on the noodle with, "Howdy do, Joseph." He recoiled at the unexpected thrust, but came back with, "Wally Wilson, got a minute?" I looked at the calendar, counted off the days to Derby Day in my mind, and told him that I had that long, at the very least, and probably much, much longer.
Thanks you.
"Methinks," I replied.
Wally boy, he returned, you aren't playing this very smart.
"Suppose you tell me how you'd be playing it," I bounced back at him. Tell you how I have erred?" He went vague on me.
If I were of a suspicious nature, I would begin to wonder about certain connective events. For instance, let's hypothecate. Let's say that a certain prominent bookmaker had been suspected of planning to put a fix on a certain important horse race, but of course nothing could be proved. Now, from another source, we suddenly discover strong evidence to suggest that this bookmaker is not accepting wagers on the horses he is backing, but conversely is busy laying wagers on the same nags through the help of a rather inept go-between.
I grunted aloud, which caused Nora Taylor to look up in surprise. I was tempted to say it aloud, but I did not. I thought, "In simple terms, Joseph, you are miffed because I will not cover your bets."
I thought nothing of the sort.
"Let's hedge? I love you too, Joseph."
Well, are you or aren't you?
"Are I what? Going to top the frosting by financing your little scheme to put the pinch on me?"
Now, Wally.
"Can it, Joseph? We're both big boys now, and we both know what the score is. You know and I know that the first time I or one of my boys takes a bet on any one of the three turtles you like, the guy who laid the bet is going to slip the word to one of your outside men. And you're going to leap to the strange conclusion that if Wally Wilson is accepting bets against his own fix, he must know something exceedingly interesting."
Now, who's been saying anything about a fix, Wally?
"The people," I thought bluntly, "who have most recently been associated with your clever kind of operator."
That isn't very nice, Wally.
If it had been a telephone conversation, I'd have slammed the telephone on him. The mealy-mouthed louse and his hypocritical gab was making me mad, and I knew that he was making me mad simply to make me lose control of my blanket. I couldn't stop it, so I let my anger out by thinking, "You think you are clever because you're slipping through sly little loopholes, Joseph. I'm going to show you how neat it is to get everything I want, including your grudging admission of defeat, by the process of making use of the laws and rules that work in my favor."
You're a wise guy, he hurled back at me.
"I'm real clever, Barcelona, and I'm big enough to face you, even though Phil Howland, the Greek, and Chicago Charlie make like cold clams at the mention of your name."
Why, you punk.
"Go away, Barcelona. Go away before I make up my mind to make you eat it." I turned to Nora Taylor and regarded her charms and attractions, both physical and mental, with open and glowing admiration. It had the precalculated result, and it wouldn't have been a whit different if I'd filed a declaration of intent and forced her to read it first. It even satisfied my ambient curiosity about what a telepathed grinding of the teeth in frustrated anger would transmit as. And when it managed to occur to an unemployed thought center of my brain that the lines of battle were soft and sweetly curved indeed, Joseph Barcelona couldn't stand it any more. He just gave a mental sigh and signaled for the noisemakers to shut him off from contact.
Derby Day, the first Saturday in May, dawned warm and clear with a fast, dry track forecast for post time. The doorbell woke me up, and I dredged my apartment to identify Nora fiddling in my 2-bit kitchen with ham and eggs. Outside, it was Lieutenant Delancey practicing kinematics by pressing the button with a levitated pencil instead of shoving it on the thing directly. I changed the combination on the Mind Warden at Nora's suggestion. As I struggled out of bed, Nora flashed, "You get it, Wally," at me. She was busy manipulating the ham slicer and the coffee percolator and floating more eggs from the refrigerator. The invitation and the acceptance for and of breakfast was still floating in the mental atmosphere heavy enough to smell the coffee. I replied to both of them, "If he can't get in, let him go hungry." Lieutenant Delancey manipulated the door after I'd reset the Mind Warden for him. He came in with a loud verbal greeting that Nora answered by a call from the kitchen. I couldn't hear them because I was in the shower by that time. However, I did ask, "What gives, Lieutenant?"
It's Derby Day.
"Yeah? So what?"
Going to watch it from here?
He thought incredulously.
Why not? Be a big jam down there.
"I have a box," he said. "No. How?"
Both the Derby Association and the Chicago Police Force have assigned me to protect you from the evil doings of sinners," he said with a chuckle. And I suggested that the best way of keeping an official eye on you was to visit you at the scene of the alleged intended crime, and to serve that end they provided me with a box where we could all be together.
I tossed, "And if we do not elect to go to Kentucky?" He chuckled again.
"And I shall have to arrest you."
"For what?"
"There is an old law in the city statute that declares something called massive cohabitation to be illegal. You have been naughty, Wally."
Nora exploded. "We have not!" she cried. Lieutenant Delancey laughed like a stage villain.
"The law I mentioned," he said after a bit of belly laughing, "was passed long, long ago, before telepathy and perception were available to provide the truth. At that time, the law took the stand that any unmarried couple living together would take advantage of their unchaperoned freedom, and if this state of cohabitation went on for a considerable length of time, called massive, but don't ask me to justify the term, the probability of their taking pleasure in one another's company approached a 100% positive probability. Now, this law was never amended by the Review Act. Hence, the fact that you have been chastely occupying separate chambers has nothing to do with the letter of the law that says simply that it is not lawful for an unmarried couple to live under the same unchaperoned roof."
I came out of the shower, toweling myself and manipulating a selection of clean clothing out of the closet in my bedroom. "The law," I observed, "is administered by the intent of the law and not by the letter, isn't it?"
"Oh, sure," he said, "but I'm not qualified to interpret the law. I'll arrest you and bring you to trial, and then it's up to some judge to rule upon your purity and innocence of criminal intent and freedom from moral taint or turpitude. Maybe take weeks, you know."
"And what's the alternative?" I grunted.
"Flight,"
he said in a sinister tone as I came out of my bedroom, putting the last finishes on my necktie.
"Flight away from the jurisdiction of the law that proposes to warp the meaning of the law to accomplish its own ends."
"And you?"
"My duty," he grinned, "is to pursue you."
"In which case," observed Nora Taylor, "we might as well fly together and save both time and money."
That is why I have my personal sky buggy all ready to go instead of requisitioning an official vehicle," he said.
He scooped a forkful of eggs and said,
"You're a fool, Wally. The lady can cook."
I chuckled. "And what would happen if I hauled off and married her?"
"You mean right here and now?"
"Yes."
"Sorry, I'd have to restrain you. You see, you couldn't you couldn't get a legal license, nor go through any of the other legal activities. Ergo, there would be a prima facie illegality about some part of the ceremony.
Without being definite as to which phase, I would find it my duty to restrain you from indulging in any act the consummation of which would be illegal.
Nora said in a pseudo-petulant tone, I've been damned with very faint praise.
How so?
Wally Wilson has just said that he'd rather marry me than go to the Kentucky Derby with you.
Lieutenant Delancey said, I urge you both to come along. You see, my box is also being occupied by an old friend of yours. I managed to talk him into joining us, and with reluctance, he consented.
I'm a mind reader, I said. Our friend's name is Joseph Barcelona.
As they say on the space radio, I firm over and out.
I am having way too much fun. I should stop having fun. It is a fun-free zone as I go bang, bang, bang.
It's a fun-free zone, serious reading only. You must only read seriously. I am not going to do that. It is boring. I am boring in real life. I don't have to be boring here. Ha ha!
Barcelona was there with two of his boys. Watching them were four ununiformed officers. Nora and I and the lieutenant were joined later by Gimpy Gordon, who might have been radiating childlike wonder and a circus air of excitement at actually being at the Derby. He might have been. No one could cut through the constant, maddening mental blah 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 that was being churned out by Barcelona's noisemakers. He greeted me curtly, eyed Nora hungrily. He said, You look pretty confident, Wilson. I can't lose, I said. No? Frankly, I don't see how you can win. I smiled. Without mentioning any names, Joseph, I feel confident that the final outcome of this racing contest will be just as you want it to be. I shall ask that no credit be given me, although I shall be greatly admired by our mutual friend Miss Nora Taylor, who will think that I am truly wonderful for making you happy. And it is more than likely that she may marry me once I have shown you, and she, and Lieutenant Delancey, that I am a law-abiding citizen as well as a man who values friendship enough to do as his old pal Joe Barcelona desires.
It's going to be one of the neatest tricks of the week, he said.
It will be done by the proper application of laws, I said modestly. Behind us, Gimpy Gordon light-fingered a $50 out of Delancey's pocket and was attracting the attention of a hot dog peddler by waving his program. Some folks nearby were eyeing Barcelona's noisemakers angrily, but making very little visible protest once they identified him. Nora was reading her program and underlining some horses. The whole place began to grow into a strange, excited silence as the trackboard began to go up. It was to be a 9-horse race, and at the top of the list were three, count them, 3 odds-on favorites. 1. Murdoch's Horde, 1-2. 2. Mewhoo's Jet, 3-5. 3. Johnny Brack, 5-7. 4. Piper's Son, 8-5. Daymare, 3-1. 6. Helen O'Loy, 8-1. And then, of course, there were our 3 mud turtles, which must have been entered by someone who thought that the Kentucky Derby was a claiming race, and who hoped that the LePage's Glue people would make a bid for the 3 mounds of thoroughbred horseflesh that dropped dead in the back stretch. 7. Flying Heels, 100-1. 8. Moonbeam, 250-1. 9. Lady Grace, 500-1. The rack hadn't hit the top of the slide before there was a sort of mass movement towards the Mutuel windows. The ones who didn't go in person tried to hurl betting thoughts in the hope of getting there early, and failing this, they arose and followed the crowd. Slowly, the odds began to change. The figures on our 3 platers began to rise. There was very little activity on the other 6 horses. Slow-thinking Gimpy Gordon started to get up, but I put out a hand to stop him.
But the odds are dropping, he complained.
Gimpy, I said. They pay on the final listing anyway. But would you like a tip?
Sure,
He said nervously. My tip is to keep your cash in your pocket. Put it on the nose of some horse, and it's likely to get blown away by a high wind. The odds were changing rapidly. What a what with what with psionic information receivers, trend predictors, and estimated anticipators, the Mutuel computers kept up with the physical transfer of funds, figured out the latest odds, and flipped the figures as fast as the machinery could work the dials. In no more than a few minutes, the odds on the three platers looked more like the odds on horses that stood a chance of winning. Barcelona looked at me.
what did you do, wise guy?
Who? Me? Why, I didn't do anything that you did not start, except maybe that I was a little more generous.
Spiel,
He snarled. Why, shucks, Joseph. All I did was to slip good old Gimpy Gordon a tip.
how much?
Just a lousy little $1,000 bill.
$1,000? For what, wise guy?
Why, just for telling me what horses you picked for the Derby. Barcelona looked at the odds on his horses. Flying Heels had passed even money and was heading for a 2-to-1 odds on. The other platers were following accordingly.
And what did you tell Gimpy, Wilson?
You tell him, Gimp, I said.
Why, Wilson just said that we should ride along with you, Mr. Barcelona, because you are such a nice guy that everybody works awfully hard to see that you get what you want.
There's more,
roared Barcelona.
Only that I shouldn't mention it to anybody, and that I shouldn't place my bet until the Mutuel window's open, because if I did, it would louse up the odds and make you unhappy.
Gimpy looked at Barcelona's stormy face, and he grew frightened.
Honest, Mr. Barcelona, I didn't say a word to nobody. Not a word.
He turned to me and whined plaintively.
You tell him, Mr. Wilson. I didn't say a word.
I soothed him. We know you didn't, Gimpy. Barcelona exploded.
Ye gods, he howled. They used that gimmick on me when I lost my first baby tooth. Don't put your tongue in the vacant place, they said, and don't think of the words gold tooth and it'll grow in natural gold.
As he spoke, the odds on Flying Heels changed from a staggering 1-to-8 to an even more staggering 1-to-10. That meant that anybody holding less than a $10 bet on such a winner would only get his own money back, because the track does not insult its clients by weighing them down with coins in the form of small change. They keep the change and call it breakage for any amount over an even dollar money. Delancey said to Barcelona,
You've had it, Joseph.
Barcelona snarled,
Put the arm on Wilson here. He's the fast man with the big fix. Wilson didn't fix any race, Joseph. He just parlayed some of the laws of human nature into a win for himself and a lose for you. Now see here, what's this guff about human nature? Well, there's the human desire to ride with a winner and the human frailty that hopes to get something for nothing. To say nothing of the great human desire to be on the inside track or in the know so that they can bet on the sure thing. And so, said Delancey, we've had about 20,000 human beings full of human nature holding tickets on your 3 dogs, Joseph. They bet their money because the inside dope said that the big fix was in. And I can tell you that what 20,000 people are gonna do to this inside dope when their nags run last is going to make Torquemada ask permission to return to life for a second inquisition, this time with extrasensory tortures.
He turned to me as Barcelona went pale.
Wally, he asked, want to bet that someone doesn't remember that old question of whether it is possible to break every bone in a man's body without killing him?
I'd be a fool to cover that one, I said, but I'll play even money and on either side of whether Joseph dies or lives through the process.
Stop it,
screamed Barcelona. He grabbed me by the arm.
Wilson, he pleaded. Can you? Stop it, I mean. Can you fix it?
Sure, I said.
Legally?
Yep, but it'll cost you.
Just money?
Just money, and admitting that you lost, Joseph.
I lose, he said. Go ahead.
Okay, Joseph. Now, let's be real honest. Those 3 longshore turtles belong to you, don't they?
Yes.
And right now, you wouldn't even want to see them run, would you? In fact, you really want that they shouldn't run.
Yes.
All right, Joseph. Call off your noisemakers and toss the head steward a thought. Tell him you're scratching your entries.
But that won't stop the people from losing their money.
Natch. So, next you broadcast a thought that because of this terrible, grievous error, you are refunding their money out of your own pocket, since the Track Association will not or is not obliged to. He turned to his pair of rattleheads and snarled,
All right, shut up.
A mental silence fell that was like the peace of rest after a busy day. As Barcelona was tossing his cancellation at the steward and preparing to make a full and plausible explanation to the gambling instinct of the Kentucky Derby crowd, I considered the matter carefully. Let's see, I thought. He wants them not to run, and so he can't complain to me if they do not. I didn't fix the race, so Lieutenant Delancey can't accuse me of that. That makes everybody happy, and I win. A small hand stole into mine. How about me, Walling? Nora asked sweetly. I looked down at a thionite dream come true by the glow in her eyes that admired no one else but me. You're mine, I reminded her, until Flying Heels, Moonbeam, and Lady Grace with 1, 2, and 3 at the Kentucky Derby. Win 1, 2, and 3 at the Kentucky Derby. Or, she said mischievously, till death do us part. I was instructing her how to respond to a kiss as a lady should respond when about 200,000 noisy, exuberant human natures yelled and radiated and thought, "They're off!" But they didn't mean us. They were watching a bunch of long-faced hay-burners tracing one another around a dusty track. Human nature ain't changed a bit. It's just more complicated in an extrasensory sort of way. The end. And that was from 1959, Astounding Science Fiction. And that was The Big Fix by George O. Smith. I wonder, in 1956, I think E. Doc Smith would have still been alive then. It could still be his son. Let me find out. Because I see Thionite Dream, and I think only one thing, and that is one word, in fact, and that is Lensman. So I gotta look. Wikipedia. George O. Smith, American writer. It could just be an admiration thing or a cute reference. George Oliver Smith, born April 9th, 1911, died May 27th, 1981, is also known by the pseudonym Wesley Long, was an American science fiction author. He is not to be confused with George H. Smith, another American science fiction author. Smith was an active contributor to Astounding Science Fiction during the golden age of science fiction in the 40s. His collaboration with the magazine's editor, John W. Campbell Jr., was interrupted when Campbell's first wife, Donya, left him in 1959 and married Smith. Ooh! Drama! Wowzers! That's like, what? Like, oh, geez. Didn't, musicians. Jimi Hendrix. He did that to somebody. Who did he do that to? Was that Miles Davis? Or Miles Davis did it to him? I don't remember now. Somebody screwed somebody over in the woman department, and I don't remember why or who. Whatever. Still, that's crazy. Smith continued regularly publishing science fiction novels and stories until 1960. His output greatly diminished in the 1960s and 70s when he had a job that required his undivided attention. He was given the first Fandom Hall of Fame award in 1980. I'll look at that in a minute. He was a member of the all-male literary banqueting club, the Trapdoor Spiders, which served as the basis of Isaac Asimov's fictional group of mystery solvers, the Black Widowers. Oh, interesting. So, does not appear to be related to E. E. Doc Smith. Is George H. Smith related to E. E. Doc Smith? No, doesn't look like it. In any case, thionite. It's a drug thing. And I associate it with Lensman. If thionite is an actual drug, then I'm sorry, I'm ignorant, clearly. But I associate it with Lensman because that's like the major drug ring that gets busted in the Lensman series. Let me see if the E. E. Doc Smith thing says that he has a kid. I could go on for ages about I could gush about Lensman and how I think it's borderline criminal. Okay, no. Oh my God, he really named his kids after characters in the book. What a nerd! I love him. I love him. I knew that his wife was kind of an XP. It turns out it's his wife's sister was an XP. Or the character in the novels was an XP of his wife. Um, whatever. Whatever. At any rate, no, apparently not related, and he's just giving a nod, an homage there to E. E. Doc Smith and Thionite. Why I look up Thionite and it immediately came up with Lensman series, and yet when I try to search for the word Thionite in the link it provided, it did nothing. So I'm sort of frustrated. Whatever. In any case, I gotta run. Thanks everybody who tuned in. I do this every week starting at about noon. Next week probably we'll be starting Hellburner, the sequel to Heavy Time by C.J. Cherry. Check it out. It's a bit different. It's less about being in the asteroid belt and a lot more about kind of building up to some of the action that will go down in the later novel chronologically, but not writing order. Chronologically in the series timeline, but not in writing order. That's the way I should put it. Down below station. So yeah, check that out. That'll be fun. I still will maintain that there's similarity between this and The Expanse, but only in the loosest possible way. You don't really have much alien action going on. It's all really personal human stuff. Mostly, there are aliens in the universe in which C.J. Cherry had written these books, but they're kind of on the other side of they're in a different direction than where most of the action will wind up happening. I forget which novels detail that offhand, but in any case, hopefully people enjoyed this. I do like reading short stories as well as entire novels. But yeah, I do it every week starting at about noon every Friday on Free Read Fridays, where I read short stories and indeed entire novels aloud. I also do other streams throughout the week. I've got a Mecha Monday stream where I do something giant robot related or mecha adjacent, and then I have a Warframe Wednesday stream where I do something Warframey for a couple hours. I gotta run. Thanks for tuning in. Have a good one. Stay safe, stay sane, and be decent to each other. Don't just ask yourself, what would MacGyver do? The real one, not the new one. God, why would they reboot that series and do such a bad? But yeah, seriously, Lensman series. Let's go. Come on, somebody make, I don't know, a TV series or a movie or something. Anything. Anything with the IP. Please. Smith Estate.